Hello, family and friends. My name is John Rushameza, and welcome to the Counter Revolution podcast. The Counter Revolution podcast aims to facilitate and contribute to a biblical and historic Christian conservative counter revolution in response to the current godless revolution in our society today. Our mission here at the Counter Revolution podcast is to reclaim, redeem, and reform all education for the church and to restore her to her rightful place as the foundation and pillar of truth according to the Bible. As you know, as I just said, I am not pro public school at all. I don't want that to be confused. I am not pro public school. I want the public schools to be closed down. Now, I understand obviously this is people's careers, this is people's jobs. I understand that some kids don't have nowhere to go. Some kids are probably much safer in the public school than they are in their houses. I understand that some people do not have the resources to remove their children from public schools. And I understand that a lot of people, they don't even agree with me. They think the public schools are good. They just need more money. They need a few reforms by politicians. And if you're a Christian, they probably believe, well, Christians need to actually be involved more in the public schools, but the public schools are good and necessary for society. That's not me. I do not think that. I think especially Christians should not be depending on the government to educate their children. I would argue that there's a lot of things we as Christians depend on the government for that we should not be depending on the government on. But I would start with education. I would argue that the church community, the ecclesia, the body of Christ, the remnant of God in society should come together and come up with a way to educate the children. Public school should not be an option. It is only an option, I believe, because we have allowed it. The Catholics, to a large degree, they set up their own parochial schools to not send children to government school. Yes, it's because they thought, well, the government schools are Protestant. We're not going to send our children to be educated by Protestants, so we'll start our own school. Well, the Protestants now, today, need to say, hey, the government is teaching another religion. We don't want our children being educated from another religion. We need to start our own school. So that's my position. However, the reason I'm saying this is because my guest on this particular show is not completely the way I am. Now, we obviously agree on a lot, on a lot more than we disagree. And I am going to be as respectful as possible to my guest with whom I disagree because I want to have actual conversations where I'm listening a lot more than I'm talking. Because I really want to get into the psyche of this particular subject in order to really make my argument. I want to bring people on here to have a conversation, to listen to them, listen to their perspective, their position, and even their advice to the degree that they can give advice. So in this particular episode, I have a gentleman. His name is Dan Simon Sr. According to the About page in his website, it says, Dan Simon has been coaching and mentoring and speaking to individuals, businesses, and large audiences to help them create a great success financially, physically, emotionally. Dan Simon has dedicated his entire adult life to growth and change and inspiration. Did I mention Dan Simon is a Christian, is a man of God, spirit-filled Christian? He is. Dan Simon served in educational leadership roles for over 20 years. After starting his own career as a mathematics teacher, coach, and advisor, he rapidly ascended to school district leadership roles, including 20 years as high school principal slash director and superintendent. Under Dan's tenure as principal of High Technology High School, the school rose to number one rank of U.S. high schools, according to U.S. News and World Report. So, without further ado, I just wanted to frame this conversation. I give you Dan Simon. Let me also say, please forgive the sound. My internet is not right, so some of the at some parts the sound is gonna be a little bit patchy. It's not gonna be lining up with the video. I did everything I could to fix it, but I just had to share this conversation. I think it was a great conversation that Dan Simon and I had. I hope you will enjoy it. My friend, my new friend, Dan Simon. Is that how you say it? Simon?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Dan Simon, welcome to the Counter Revolution podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. It's a blessing to be here.
Yes, sir. So thank you for agreeing to do this with me. As I have already told you, I called this podcast a Counter Revolution on purpose because I believe that education here in America, especially, but a lot of other things, have undergone or are currently undergoing a revolution, which is godless, humanistic, and I blame everything almost. Obviously, we're Christians, so we see a fallen world. We see, people just being people, but there are ways that people tend to explain things. For me, I have come to the conclusion that education is primarily, if not the main vehicle in which people either bring change for good or change for evil. So I deliberately called this podcast a counter revolution because I want Christians to start thinking in terms of countering what is currently going on, especially American Christian, because although my accent might give me away, I am a citizen of this country and I love this country
Yes,
to
sir.
death.
Yes, sir.
So, Dan, do you mind, please, for the audience of this podcast, can you introduce yourself, say a few things about yourself, and kind of your particular expertise and interests with regards to education?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for having me, John. I absolutely. I could probably go on for a long time with an introduction, but I'll try to keep it short because that's not what we're really here to talk about. So I am recently, I would say, retired for the third time, but I've spent 33 years in education, and 25 of those, first 25 of those in public education. First 7 years as a classroom teacher, beginning to raise a family of 6 children, so needing to kind of move up the ranks pretty quickly. Got 2 master's degrees, worked in supervision and late 20s, and then early 30s, first job as a principal. And the rest of my career spent as either a principal, a director, a superintendent, as well as opened a charter school and then moved into private Christian education. So I've been here a long time. All 6 of my children were raised in public education through graduated public high schools. All that time, John, I was a Christian in public education. So make sure that that's clear, and we can certainly talk about that.
Yeah.
Since I retired the first time, I've been doing a lot more work specifically in coaching, advising, consulting. I work with several Christian organizations, Christian school organizations, and I do a lot of my work with adolescents. That's my gifting. The Lord blessed me with the ability to relate to adolescents, which I know not everybody can. So I spend a lot of time with adolescents on college, career, vocation advising, and recently been able to spend more time with military children supporting those families who sacrifice so much for
Yeah.
us, and having one of my own in the military now, to even more near and dear to my heart. So that's my background. Married to an incredible woman for the past 31 years, six children, six grandchildren, number seven on the way. Um, but God has been so good, and all I strive to do now in this next phase of my career is give back wherever He leads me. So that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. That's a long career. Definitely um someone that I'm interested to talk to for this particular podcast, because one thing I've committed to on this podcast is to have conversations with people. I don't have an education background, zero. I mean, I went to school. I went to
You went to
public
school.
school. Um, I went to public school in Africa. I grew up in Zambia. I'm originally from Rwanda, so I went up to fifth grade in Rwanda, and then went to Zambia. Went all the way through high school. I dropped out in 11th grade. Um, so I went to college. I went to Bible school, but I don't have any kind of education, anything. I'm just passionate about it. My father was an educator in Africa, so I guess maybe that's where I get the passion from. Um, so I don't want to just talk about this. I want to have conversations with people that know what they're talking about. I want to get a conversation going that is meaningful and substantive, and the only way to do that is to bring people that know what they're talking about.
Well, thank you
So
for the honor of feeling that I'm one of those people, John.
yeah, yeah, well, yeah, and believe, I think you remember this, but when I posted in that group, someone highly recommended you. So you come highly recommended.
Yeah, and I owe her a cup of coffee for that. I think, yes, that was my good friend Megan. I appreciate that.
Okay, yes, there you go. So um so talk to me then. You said you did public school, you taught adolescents, uh you taught math. Am I correct to say you are
I
a math
started my
teacher?
career. I still
Okay.
do, actually. I still teach on the college level. I've actually been an adjunct for over 20 years, and I'm actually doing, believe it or not, I'm teaching in the prison system. I'm teaching
Yeah.
classes at the correctional center, and loving the opportunity to be a positive light there and make a difference there. So yeah, that's what I'm currently doing. So I started in math, and I'm still teaching.
Yeah, very nice. I have a friend, good friend of mine. I look up to him as a mentor. Um, he has a ministry called Embracing Brokenness.
Mm,
Him and his wife, they're very actively involved in prison ministry
right,
right now. So
right.
anyway, so public school. Just I want to hear kind of what drew you into teaching. What was it that caused you to say, okay, this is the path I'm gonna take?
Oh, that's a great question. I haven't really reflected on that in a long time because I've been doing it for so long. I forget where it started, but my undergraduate degree was actually going to be mathematics, and
Yes.
just pure mathematics. And then I guess everybody gets to a course in their major where they're like, "Whoa, I don't know if I want to do this."
Yeah.
And for me, it was real analysis. I got to real analysis, and I thought, I better find something else to do with math that isn't math, right? Like strictly math. So
Yeah.
I had all along, I had been pursuing education classes. I think I always just had, a gut feeling that it was really where I was called to be. But I had to figure that out for myself. And when I graduated, I had the major in math and the minor in education, but I did my student teaching, and kind of recognized this is where I belong. So I came home got a long-term substitute position within months of graduation, finished out that school year, and then I was hired the following year to teach middle school math. And then in that time, because we were already working on another child, it was one of those situations where I had um, every opportunity to coach, to advise, to
Yeah.
lead, to bring in an extra stipend. I was doing all that, and at the same time studying for the first of what would become two master's degrees. While my wife, bless her heart, she took on all the responsibilities of the home and raising the children, while I would kind of I'd show back up after dinner time and spend some cuddle time. And
Yeah.
that was where we were until I got to a point where I was able to take those administrative roles. And I think I found a very interesting piece of that, John, is that along the path, as I thought about moving up in the ranks, right, it was
Yeah.
always thinking that the higher up you get, the more influence you have, right? So I moved from classroom teaching into department chair, math department chair, moved from that into a supervisor of a multiple departments to a role as a principal. And so I really enjoyed the role as a principal. One of the schools that I was principal rose to the #1 ranking in the US. And it was just an honor and a blessing.
Yeah.
And then I had my opportunity to pursue a superintendency, and now thinking influence, right? I mean, you're the top dog, if you will, in the district. And I found that I really lost my passion because it became more about the business of education
Yeah.
than the process. I lost the relationships. I lost the relationships with the kids, the relationships with the teachers. So I actually did what not a lot of people do. I actually took a step back. I left the superintendency. I went back to being a principal, and I finished my career in public school in that role before I moved on to open a charter, and then moved on to be a director in Christian education circles before I settled into what I'm doing now, which is strictly advising and counseling and coaching. So
Yeah.
it was always for me, always about the relationship with the kids. And I'm still
Right.
doing that. I still coach adolescents through advising, career, college, and vocation. I think that's really where my gifting is. And it would be in many ways, it would be a sin not to be acting on that, because that's the gift that God given me.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. I imagine every almost maybe not everyone, but I would argue every good teacher sees it more than just a job. It's a calling. Um, it's an assignment, or however way you choose to name it. But
Hmm.
if people that see it as a business, to me, probably in anything, they tend to burn out pretty quickly, and to go for 30 years, you have to almost see it as a calling, as an assignment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you are okay. So as a Christian,
Hmm.
I imagine in public school, um, how do you navigate?
Hmm.
How do you, because based on what I see and hear, I have some friends. I live here in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, which is not like Philadelphia, but so it's somewhat conservative compared to areas like Philadelphia. But even here, friends of mine who are in public education find it challenging. What's your experience? What was your personal experience in how you navigated um this
Yeah.
this field?
Yeah. It's a question I'm asked often, John, and I love being able to share my answer, because um, you've probably heard the phrase, right, that we're called to preach the gospel, and occasionally, when necessary, use words, right?
Right. Mhm.
Um, that's what it was. That's what it was for me. I mean, it was about the way that I treated people. It was
Mhm.
about the way that I spoke to them. It was about the way that I would love on them, to show grace, to forgive, to it was one of those things that I, like I said, I can't even tell you like that. I don't feel like I did anything special. I just feel like I was living out my faith in the role that I was playing, and I understood, right, that I couldn't really make any direct, uh, I couldn't quote the gospel, right? I couldn't, but there's ways to communicate the gospel without using the words of the gospel, right? I don't have to
Yeah.
quote, John. I don't have to quote Romans. I can live out what it says. So
Right.
for me, that's what it was like. And so I think people absolutely knew that. I mean, John, in 33 years in 25 years in public education, people without question, they knew my walk, they knew my position, they knew where I came from. I never had an issue. I never had a confrontation, even as a principal, even as a superintendent. And I would say that's because people liked the way that I spoke to them, and people liked the way that I treated them, and people would sometimes ask me, "Are you a Christian?" Like, because it was just like I was different, right, than a lot of other people. And people need to know that, especially those in public education. Like, when someone asks you that question,
Yeah.
they just opened the door for you to answer that question.
Yeah.
You're no longer limited in a sense by what you can say. If a student asks you that question,
Mhm.
you don't shed your rights at the doors of the school. You have a right to answer that question, right? You can't teach something, preach something, proselytize, right, where they're a captive audience. But if you're asked a question, you have every right to answer that question. So
Yeah.
for me, that was 25 years in public school. My children, all six of them, went through the full public school system, and they had their shares of experiences. We all do, but they also, right, modeled in many ways encouraging words rather than speaking, negativity into situations, and people kind of flocked to them in their areas, whatever they were, whether it was the arts or athletics or academics,
Yeah.
because of that. So, to me, that's how you navigate it. You just be authentic. You just live out your faith, and people will ask you, and you'll answer. You don't have to
Yeah.
browbeat, to get people to know that. In fact, you shouldn't. Right? It would be better for them to see it being lived out than by listening to the words you're saying.
Yeah. 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 That's very important. That's important everywhere. Um, Even I would argue, even in church or in a Christian environment, people should be able to see how you respond to specific situation and be inspired by your faith and the way you're grounded in your faith, as opposed to kind of being wishy-washy about things, because that comes out anywhere, even in church, in your home with your kids and wife. um yeah, that's crucial, and I'm glad for Christian um teachers and influencers that are able to respond and not be ashamed of the gospel
Right on. Right on.
in the situations that God has placed them in.
Right.
um so you you taught mathematics. How long ago did you retire from public school, if I may ask?
Yeah, it would have been about 7.5 years ago. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. um and so you went from being a principal, being a superintendent. Did you say you became superintendent
Mm-hmm.
at some point?
I did. Yeah.
Super, yeah, superintendent. And then from there went back to principal before you moved into Christian education,
Right.
correct?
And in between that, I opened up a charter school. Right. Mm-hmm.
Right, charter school. So talk to me about charter school. Why the switch from oh, you said you retired from public school, then
That's right.
opened a charter school.
That's right.
What was the reasoning for that?
Yeah. So you're definitely opening I wouldn't say a wound for me, but
Yeah,
you're opening for me an opportunity to really talk about faith, right? To talk about
yeah.
trusting God. And so in that point in my life, I was able to retire. I was very, very young still. I mean, I was 25 years full pension. Well, qualified for full pension, but took an age penalty. I mean, I was still about 8 years away from the non-penalty age. So
Yeah.
so there was a financial component to it, right? Of collecting a pension and a full salary, 6 kids, having some of them already in college coming for others. So there was definitely a financial kind of a big eyes, light bulb goes off and how I'm going to, be able to pay for a lot of these things that are coming down the road. But in retrospect, I know now clearly why that opportunity presented itself for twofold. One, I was able to utilize my reputation, I guess you would say, in the area to
Hmm.
get this school opened in a community that needed it desperately.
Right.
A lot of money spent, very, very poor results. The gentleman who recruited me had been successful in California in opening up a number of charters and had been making a difference in communities. It's almost like mission work, John. It was really changing lives forever, and
Yeah.
I wanted to be part of that. And so we were successful in getting the charter open. Faced a lot of animosity, a lot of resistance, which is pretty typical, especially in New Jersey, for teacher unions to come out, public schools against formation of charter schools. Here in North Carolina, charters are the norm. A lot of states that they're the norm; they just exist. They're part of the culture.
Right.
Um, so I faced a lot of resistance there, and a lot of challenges I'd really not experienced before. So once we got the charter open, I began kind of exploring the next path where I felt God was leading me. And this is why I'm so sure God was in it, because the next step for me was Christian education. And I've been in Christian education ever since, right? And even before, I had been recruited for Christian education. Again,
Hmm.
being a Christian in public education with all the experience and success, Christian education, Christian schools were looking for that. But I was raising, again, 6 kids, all school age. Like I couldn't afford it, right? And I didn't trust God to, at that point, I figured, God, I trust you in everything, but I got this one. I'll handle this one, right? And um, so I had to be humble, and the humbling came for me in that the charter is open. The charter is thriving right now. It's doing it was meant to be opened, and I guess I was meant to be the one who got it open.
Hmm.
But once I moved on and handed it off to the person who succeeded me, they're still there. They're thriving and growing and getting tremendous results. But for me, I realized that where I was in the public school sector, I would never have left. I would have just kind of coasted through the rest of my career
Right.
in that role. And I know I was impactful and I know I was making a difference where I was, but God had another plan for me. But I don't think He ever could have gotten me out of the safe path that I
Hmm.
was on. So I think He used that time for me to once again learn to trust Him in whatever He had for me next. And so what He had for me next was Christian education. Did that for 3.5 years in New Jersey, did it for 2 years down here in North Carolina. And I have now officially retired, but I am now doing work in Christian schools as an advisor, as a coach, as a college coach. And it is all because of the path that God set me on back those years ago. So my motivation was missionary. in nature. It was, financially rewarding, and it was going to make a difference. And
Yeah.
so all of those things happened, but then God led me in another direction.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. I didn't realize you're now in North Carolina.
Mhm.
Where at in North Carolina?
I'm just outside of Raleigh.
Okay. Okay. Um. So you mentioned something about teachers unions that I've always wondered. In your career, going back to public school, uh, as a Christian, did you have to subscribe to the union protections, or how does that work?
Yeah. So at the time, there was no opt out for the unions. Well, let's say this the right way. So when I started my teaching career, right, the teacher unions were the negotiating bodies, right? So
Right.
they worked out your all the terms of your salaries. They worked out the terms of your benefits, the days off, vacation, all of that. So
Right.
there really wasn't an option not to be in the union.
Yeah.
Um, Now the union, would tell you who to vote for. You still had the right to vote for who you wanted to vote for, right? There were certain things about the union that they kind of said that they spoke for you on all things, and while they represented you in those negotiations, they certainly don't speak for you on all things. Now, teachers' unions represent their districts, right? They represent their states, so there's always a perspective from the public that all teachers believe that, all teachers vote that way, all teachers think that way. That's simply not true. The teachers union is there, as most unions are, right, to kind of come together, power in numbers, strengthen the community, and to change policy and to bring, to make life better for teachers, right? Um, there is definitely a stigma, if you will, about unions kind of protecting teachers at all costs, which means that they fail sometimes to recognize when a teacher is hindering, in a sense, the
Right.
profession, bringing it a bad name, bringing it shame in many ways, and as a union is kind of designed to do, doesn't matter. We're gonna have your back anyway, right? So that's where some of the issues can come in, and I think I had respect for one. Again, for me, it's all about relationships. So even as a superintendent, I had a really good relationship with our um, district union rep and the union rep from the state that represented the area. And the reason was because I built relationship, had
Right.
conversation, sat down to talk about issues, tried to understand, okay, give me a perspective on this. Why is it that this is what you're going for? Okay, now I need you to understand my perspective on why we as a district can't. So let's find a place, right, where we can either settle in the middle or recognize that this is going to be a sticking point. And what I wanted was I wanted them to be able to go back to their constituents and say, we are having fruitful dialogue, right? We have demands, right? But
Yeah.
they have demands also, or needs. And so what we're doing is we're being cordial. We're having conversations. And in the end, I kind of need you to trust that we're going to do the best that we can with the limitations that we have. And that's ultimately what we were always able to accomplish. So, when you're in a position of leadership, right, you have that calling from all your people to just win, 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 get us everything we want. But that's not the reality, right? So
Right.
you often say, like, why do we start negotiations this far apart, right? Why can't we just start by saying, I know you're going to need this, so I'm already ready to give you that. And I need this, and let's start here, right? Instead of this far apart.
Yeah.
So the work with the unions was, again, when I was part of a union, didn't really have much of a role. When I was faced in working with a union, kind of from the other side of the aisle, it was all about communication. It was all about building relationship. And you know, it was we became friends. You know, and that was really important to me because everywhere I worked, I didn't necessarily want people to like me, but I wanted people to know that I respected them, even if we disagreed. And that's what led to success in pretty much everywhere that I've ever worked as a school leader, and other roles as well.
Yeah, it's always been interesting to me how um you know you so we hear things in the media and on the internet, but for me, I've learned in life that there's always more to it than meets the eye. um I for example, I know based on research and the things that I'm passionate about, I know that the unions are definitely not helpful when it comes to their voting patterns and where they put their money. And I'm talking about the at the top
Politics.
there, the national unions. So I understand that when it boils down to districts and counties and areas, it probably looks a lot more different, kind of like everything else in politics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so another thing I'm curious about: are there, or at least in your area, are there such a thing as Christian unions for public school teachers?
I'm not aware of it. So the question, I see it in two parts. I think what you're saying is there like a separate union in the public school setting for Christian teachers, right?
Right.
I don't believe that exists. I do think there has been some flexibility on whether teachers are forced to pay the entire freight of the union or whether they can only pay partial because there are certain things that they don't want to be able to contribute to. I think there's been some movement in that. I
Yeah.
don't know that that's on the federal level, but I do believe that there is some negotiating power now for individuals who want to be represented on certain things and not on others. So I do think that exists. The other part I thought you might be asking with the question is, do Christian schools generally, do those educators have unions? And there are rare exceptions where they do, but on the whole they do not. They're usually at will types of employment where um, you're still evaluated and you're still, should be given a fair shake and provided with professional development and resources and everything else to help set you up for success. But there isn't that same level of protection in a Christian school setting as there is in public. So there are some, but they're very very few.
Yeah. I do know, and I'll send you the information later on. I do know that there is an entity that I found, um that is kind of, and so I don't know what state that's in.
Okay.
um it's definitely not a big kind of group like the American
NEA.
Federation of
Right.
Teachers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a group out there, at least one that I found, that does those kind of things. They have lawyers, they have uh different things, that if a Christian teacher goes to them and say, hey, here's my dues, I don't want the NEA, I want you guys, they can come in and um
Wow.
do something similar. I'm sure they're probably a David in front of Goliath when you compare. But
I'd love to read on that, John. Please do share that because that I'd love to be able to share that out of this meeting with any other schools that I talk to, where I know of Christians, know a lot of Christians in public education who would like to have that option. So
yeah,
yeah, thank you.
and this is specifically for Christians in public
Mm-hmm.
education. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not even looking at Christians in Christian education.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the guy that founded it, he was a public school teacher, and he didn't want, like you said earlier, he didn't want to give his money so
Mm-hmm.
that the money can then be used to the other extracurricular
Right.
activities that the NEA has with with the Democratic Party. Um, but anyway, so I'll share that with you. Um,
Thank you.
so the you moved from you started a charter school. It's successful. You then moved to Christian education. So let's pick up from there. What are the experiences, and how um does it compare with the other one?
Oh, okay. So that's a great question. I lost you a little bit at the beginning there, but if I understand, you're asking the question basically comparing Christian education experience with public education experience. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a great question, and I'm really really excited to kind of talk about that because I was talking about my perspectives on Christian education long before I was involved directly in Christian education, right? So my perceptions, many of them turned out to be a reality, right? That there are those in Christian education circles who see Christian education as a bubble, right?
Yeah.
A bubble. I'm going to put my child inside this bubble and I'm going to protect them, right? From all the evil stuff that's out there, right? And then even outside of Christian education, you have home education that says, I don't even trust the Christian education. I'm just going to do it myself, right? And I'm just going to protect and I'm going to cover and I'm going to just wrap my arms around and, keep them safe forever. So
Mhm.
I had this perception in some ways that that's what Christian education kind of looked like. And I would say my first experience, right, in before I got involved in it, my oldest daughter went to public high school, graduated public high school, wanted to go to Christian college. So my wife and I actually both felt like, I don't think it's the right fit for you based on, the fact that you have always been one who's found that balance between your faith and life and friends and community. But we supported her. And her experience in that first year, right, when she first got there, was she was surrounded, as you can imagine, by either homeschooled or Christian schooled peers. And so they kind of thumbed their nose a little bit at her as like, ew, this heathen, this public school girl here at our Christian university, right? Was kind of the perspective. But John, it didn't take long. I could have predicted this, right? It didn't take long that these students who had been somewhat sheltered, right, for that period of time,
Mhm.
who never really got life experience in an environment where they were protected, but yet, you know, uh, 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 could fall down, right? Could experience hurt, could experience pain, and then kind of grow and grow through that. They were finding those things out and experiencing those things for the first time in their college experience. So a lot of these students that came from either a Christian school environment or a homeschool environment, they didn't make it. They couldn't survive because for the first time they were on their own now and they didn't know where to go, who to turn to, how to resolve. Meanwhile, my daughter, who had always been kind of balancing her faith with her academics, with her extracurriculars, she
Mhm.
she did very well, but she was kind of turned off by the experience. So when I then got into Christian education, I took a very close look at that. I said, we've got to be of the mindset that we have to be preparing our students for what's out there. We can't shelter them from it. We can't put them in the bubble, wrap them in bubble wrap, and then just say it's going to be okay because you're not going to be exposed to those things, right? Because we all know they're going to be exposed to it anyway,
Yeah.
right? And we can't, you can cut off their internet, you can, not give them a cell phone, you can do all those things, and they're still going to be exposed to it. So, what better place to do that than in a Christian school environment where we can talk about an issue and we can say, what do you hear about this issue? What do you think about this issue? What does the Bible say about this issue? And then in the end, they can form their own kind of strong position that they can defend later in life, whether it be at college, whether it be, in the neighborhood, whether it be on the debate stage, whatever it is. So I brought a very different perspective that public school is evil and not welcomed here in Christian school, to a place where I was able to bring 25 years of public school experience and say, public school gets a lot of things right. They do a lot of things well. So we need to be kind of more open to finding the balance between what successes there are in public school with our mission and how we want to bring students up to be to be world changers. But you have to be in the world to do that. In the world, but not of it, right? So we're going to train them how to do that. So that was the shift that I made in the culture of the school that I was in. And then in the second school, kind of carried more of the same idea. The other piece I would say is this. There was, I think, a perspective in Christian education that parents were willing to sacrifice the academics for the experience, right? So, well, they might not be getting the best academics that they'd be getting in the public school, but at least they're not, getting exposed to this and they're not getting exposed to that. So it's okay. It's a fair trade. And I kept thinking, man, that means we're willing as a Christian school to say that we're going to settle for less than the best. Like, I mean, is that what God calls us to do? Is to say, well, you're a Christian, that's good. So everything else, doesn't really matter. So it was really important for me to raise the level of academic opportunity and academic preparation for our students, exposure to dual enrollment classes and AP classes and, and teachers that are well trained and well compensated, right? Because that whole notion in Christian education that, it's a ministry, right? So we just kind of expect you to make the sacrifice and survive below the poverty line on a salary that not even a 20-year-old would expect to live off of, because it's ministry. So there's so many facets to bringing that public school perspective into Christian education, and I found that there is a balance. There's a delicate balance. Can't have too much of one or too much of the other. You need to find a balance in there, and the Christian schools that do that best are the ones that I think are doing the best job of preparing their students for life.
Woo, man.
Woo.
Well, so my view is this. Public education. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Christian education has to be superior education.
Absolutely.
I don't really see it any other way. There's no two ways to this. If we're saying we know the truth, right? We have Christ, we have reality, we have the right world view, right? We have to have a superior education. We can't. That's why, to me, a lot of the things that is called Christian education is not really education in the strict sense of the word. It's not Christian education. Might be something else, youth night or whatever. But it's not education, because a Christian education has to be deliberate, a deliberate addressing of everything that public school has at the very least, but from a Christian perspective.
Absolutely.
Not any less. Not there's no, you know. So part of my hope with doing this is to help Christians understand that we're not secondary. We're not fighting for second place here. If we have the right worldview, we have to be fighting for first place. People need to pluck their kids out of public school and bring them to us, even non-Christians, because we have a superior education. That's my view.
Yeah. So what I would say to you is, there's two perspectives in Christian education, right? There's, I guess what you would call, I know that the North and the South use different terms for it, but down here, I believe they call it covenant school, right? Which is that we only accept families that are aligned with our mission, right? So that might mean that you have to be a practicing Christian that attends a church, one or at least one parent, maybe both parents, right?
Yeah.
It's you only use the King James version of the Bible, right? I mean, there's definitely even some criteria that are defined there. But then there's the other approach, right? There is the more evangelistic approach, which says our doors are wide open. And you coming here as a non-believer, understand we're not going to change who we are, what we teach, what we believe because you don't believe, right? So you are coming here with the understanding that you're going to learn, you're going to take a Bible class, you're going to be part of chapel, you're going to do all these things. So Christian schools differ on that perspective, right? Sometimes it's about enrollment. It's about just getting as many bodies as you can in the door to be able to pay the salaries. There is a challenge with that, though, John, and that challenge becomes when you are an evangelistic mindset, mission, right? Then you are going to be bringing, let's say unbelievers, right, into your context with the hope, I think, that you are going to influence them. But the influence can also work the other way around, right? When you begin to bring in a student body where maybe now was a minority is now a growing minority or even a majority of students that simply don't believe, they tolerate, right? But they don't believe, that begins to create a shift in culture. So it is really important in Christian education, right? To be very, very clear about what your goal is in providing that excellent education, right? Because even Christian education, is it about what colleges kids are going to, right? Is it about how much scholarship money they're earning? Is it about how high their SAT scores are? Or is it about placing students after graduation into the environment where God has called them to be, which might be trade, which might be military, which might be missionary, which might be, right? So one of the groups that I work with now, we've started a program called Vocation, College, and Career that I facilitate. And it's working with smaller Christian schools who don't have a college advisor or an expert. And the idea is to be able to come in and come alongside them, work with their students, and help them figure that out. They don't necessarily know, and everybody thinks college is the only path, but it's certainly not. So we as Christian educators, Christian schools, have to be very clear about what do we evaluate our success on. Is it about how many kids get into top tier universities, or is it about how many kids end up prepared to move forward, to work within their calling, and to maintain a life that's God-centered, right? Those are and should be the fundamental, data points, if you will, of how successful you are as a Christian school.
Amen. um. So, as I already said, my hope is to inspire a conversation among Christians because although I understand that for a lot of people, taking their kids out of public school is simply not feasible. Um,
Mhm.
I actually hope that the Christian church, especially here in America, will focus a lot more of our money and resources on providing affordable and maybe even free but superior Christian
Mhm.
education. And it has to be evangelistic. It will be available to first and foremost Christian parents, because my hope would be that the churches in each community will come together to set something up for the families that they have, but also for that community. It is, I know, an uphill battle. It's a dream that I probably never see come to fruition in my lifetime. Although there are people that have already begun this kind of work all over the place. Um, but that's my hope. That's what God has put in my heart as a kind of a passion and something to advocate for. What
Love
is
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what's your view, I guess, in terms of the current state of the public school? What do you see from your perspective? Um and what are the other solutions, if anything? Or do you think let me ask you this. Do you think public education is still a very uh good option for Christians, or would you be advocating, if something else was available, what would be your guidance to a parent in this?
Wow. What a great question, right? Because I'm probably a little bit of a rare bird in that I have kind of lived in all the worlds, right? Both through employment and as a parent, and now as a grandparent who has a one child who's in the public school and one who's being homeschooled, right? So I am a big believer in public education. Right? I always have been, as an option, as you said, for people who don't have another option, can't afford another option. Right? Um, I don't believe it's unsavable. Right? And when I say unsavable, I don't mean that we aren't still getting great results in public education. I think public education is getting away from its purpose, right? In many ways, public education, right, in general, right, particularly public. If it's public and it's not meant to be religious, right, it's not meant to have religious connotation. Okay, but that goes both ways, right? Then you're not teaching things that are in kind of in promotion of a particular religion, but you're also not teaching things that are directly contradictory to people's faith, right? And that's where the line in the sand, I guess, has been crossed. It's one thing to say you should never bring your faith into public education. Okay, well, that's not what separation of church and state meant. That's okay if you believe that, but at the same time, then you should also not be teaching things that are also in violation of my beliefs, my faith beliefs. Right? Teach the fundamentals, reading and writing and math and history, and right, let's teach these subjects excellently, and let's leave out all the other stuff that's driven by agenda and politics and everything else, right? And leave that for the home, for the church, for the community, right? A community in the middle of Nebraska, right, is going to be a very different community than Philadelphia, right? They're going to be different. So local communities should have more control over what they believe is right for their community. And so that's where I think public schools have to return. And I think we're starting to see a little of this, more return back to the control being of the parents and the the people in the community who can vote, who can go to board meetings, who can, share their opinions and their perspectives on what happens in their public schools, in their communities. In so many ways, that would cure, if you will, some of the ills. And you know what? If somebody, the next to the town where they're more aligned with your values and more aligned with your perspective on how education should be run. So I think that if public education gets back to that, then public education can be, back to being what it was intended to be. As far as options, and whether Christian parents should feel, in a sense, obligated, right, to pull their students out of that and put them in another context. I just go back, John, I don't know any other example to use than to use my own children, right? They were exposed to things. Right. And honestly, I mean, as a quick aside, they were exposed to far worse profanity with a homeschool family we knew than they were with other public school families, right? So you're going to be exposed to it no matter what. But when they were exposed to it, we had an environment of conversation. Okay, this is what you saw. What do you believe about that? What does God's word say about that? We were able to create an environment where they could then live out their faith in front of their peers, right? And they could be a light in a dark place, if you will. I don't call it, dark is just more a hypothetical or expression, but so what we were able to do is say, look, the public education, you're going to be taught some things there that we don't agree with. Okay. And so what we want you to be able to do, because you have a right to do this as a student, is defend what you believe. We want to give you the power, the tools, the confidence to be able to say, can we talk about this Big Bang idea? Right? Because I see it another way. Can we talk about this idea that a child inside the womb is not a child yet? Like, can we have that conversation? And so if we as Christian parents are providing them with those types of resources, right, kind of arming them, putting on the full armor of God, right, and then when they go in and experience those things, because look, John, we know in higher ed, it's been there forever. College has always been a bastion for that kind of, you can't believe that. You're an idiot if you believe that, right? Where there have been few and far between where students have stood up for their beliefs. We need to do a better job of that in public schools, teaching kids how to think, not what to think, right? Actually encouraging, as an educator, I want to hear various perspectives on this. I want to know, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? Let's have a conversation, not a debate, not a, I don't agree with you, so I'm going to walk away, but let's actually have a conversation about it. And so if we can arm our children as Christian parents, I think we're doing a better job of preparing them then for what they face in the world than if we pull them out and put them in a Christian ed perspective, because I've seen plenty of bad examples within a Christian ed setting as well. So I would never want a Christian parent to think that they're a bad parent because they have their child in Christian school, but they have to always be prepared to have conversations about what they're learning, what we believe, and giving them the encouragement to go back and have that kind of offer that perspective in that environment where they're being challenged.
Yeah. I'm a worldview person myself. And so even as I hear you speak about the values being taught at home and sticking to the fundamentals, I cringe on the inside because I truly believe that it's impossible to keep the values out of the conversation. You know, the secularism or the naked public square, or however way anybody would want to put it, it's impossible because we come with what we come with. As a Christian, you've already established that you live out your faith and you inspire students without even saying a word, which is the most powerful thing. But everybody that can do it from their worldview. Now, ours is obviously true salvation, eternal salvation. So that's the right way to inspire people. But you know, the secular humanist on the other side of the hallway is doing the same thing, in my view. Um. So anyway, the the idea, I think, is a mistake to think that once you put your kids in Christian school, they're now safe. As a parent, you just have to not let go, and they're gonna, you know, that's a terrible mistake. And yeah,
Agreed.
I see that mistake being made too, because we're sinful. We're sinners wherever we go. No matter how you organize us together, we're gonna find a way to mess things up. you know. Um. So, and my argument too is our kids are not really technically, most of them, they're not truly saved, at least the first number of years. So up until they've surrendered to the gospel, and then they still have to grow into it through the process of sanctification. There's a lot of messing up there. Influences from the world, being enticed by the world, by their friends. So it, I think we all have to agree that we're in the world. We can't get away from that. But I feel like Christians must be able to. And I'm not an isolationist. I don't believe in isolation. I think parents need to have these conversations with their children anyway. I think
Yes.
parents need
Agreed.
to talk to their kids about the Darwinian theory of evolution. If you teach them one side, you haven't prepared them, even if it's the right side, because
Absolutely right.
you haven't exposed them to what their college roommate or their coworker down the road might say, and then the whole experience is messed up. How come nobody ever told me that? And I'll give you an example. I went to I went to Bible school. Okay, and I remember when I first went, my first couple of classes, they started telling me all these things about the Bible and how the Bible came to be, how we got the current copy that we have today. I was shocked. That challenged my faith. I'm not gonna lie. I almost started questioning everything. Like, how come nobody ever told me this? This is like brand new information to me. Like, really? I never really thought that. You know, so then I'm finding out these things. I'm finding out these passages, these manuscripts, and all this. And so I think there's a place to say, all of us, let's prepare the children. Another comment I want to make to you personally is, I'm usually not worried about children who are, like your kids, because you're a knowledgeable guy, you're educated, and so you are at the forefront of all these things. I'm usually concerned with the lay Christian who are not as advanced in these things. um how do they guide their own children? It's tough to, and that's not on the church or the school, that's on the parent. But as a community, we kind of have to rethink all these things, because that's what the homeschooling parents do. They just take care of their own kids, and to hell with the other. And they don't say that, they're not saying it that way, my wife and I are gonna homeschool our children, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. I do. I think it's an excellent point. And homeschool, one of the concerns typically is about, socialization. They do a good job with co-ops and making sure that there's opportunities for kids to be with other kids and to learn social skills and social interactions and communication. What you just said though is really important, and it goes back to something that I had stated earlier, right? That um, if we don't, as Christian educators, right, provide those opportunities to talk about those issues that they're going to face in the world, we a lot of parents, you alluded to this, drop them off at a Christian school and just think that that's going to solve all their problems, right? Because the parents themselves may not be strong in their faith. The parents themselves may not even really believe what we believe, but they just don't want them in the public school, and it's a better option, right? Um, so we can never assume that every student situation is the same. We can never assume that every student, as you said, has two parents at home, but let alone two parents that believe, right? Two parents at home, stable, poverty, whatever. We don't know. The only way we know is by getting connected with those kids, right? And so if you want to, I mean, this has been the secret to my success for 33 years of dealing with kids is I connect with them and I get to know their story and I get to understand their challenges and their backgrounds. And you said something earlier, and I meant to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up again. You talked about the quality educators, right? Are the ones who really do have a passion. And then there are those. There are those that it's a paycheck. They've been doing it so long, they have no other options. They're finishing the end of their career and they're just going to check the boxes and there's no relationship with kids at all. And so those teachers struggle. They struggle with behavior. They struggle with lots of things. And this happens in Christian ed also, right? Because it all comes down to relationship. And that involves relationship with the kids. It involves relationships with the parents, right? It is truly a triangular relationship there as an educational system. It's not parents drop them off, we'll take care of them, right? And it's not parents do your job. It's we're going to work together to make sure that the children are hearing a consistent message. And quite honestly, sometimes the parents themselves, how many parents have been saved because of the child's faith that they've attained in a Christian school, and the parent sees the change in the child and then wants what they have, and so then the parent starts coming to church. I mean, it's an incredible testimony, incredible witness. So it is important. It is important for us to be engaging not just with the kids, but with the parents as a community. And as you said, if parents don't know those resources exist, we need to make sure that they know where to go to find out answers to some of those questions that they just don't have the answers to.
Excellent, excellent, sir. Um, so what would be your one advice to? And I think you've already alluded to some of these things, but can you give one advice to a Christian parent with a child in public school or children in public school? Or advice or word of encouragement, whatever you want to do, and also a parent with children in Christian school.
I think it's when children are younger, I think we have a tendency, the parents have a tendency to be more involved. So the first piece of advice I would give is if your child is in middle school or high school, stay involved, right? Stay involved. Don't give that up, right? Don't turn the authority there over to the school and just trust that the school is going to uh, raise them up in a way that's consistent with yourself. Stay involved. And often and my work with adolescents tells me this, when adolescents and pre-adolescents say stay away from me, when they say don't get involved in my business, right? It's not our job as parents to be friends with our children, right? For them to like us, right? It's important for us to parent them. So when they want us out of their business, we can't give them that, right? As parents, we can't give them that. We're gonna lovingly stay engaged. I remember I love this. I was told this story about my wife when my daughter was a teenager. and watching some things on TV, right, that, maybe we wouldn't have wanted her to watch, instead of, right, telling her to turn it off. So she was watching it openly. So she knew that she had the opportunity to watch it openly. My wife would sit down with her and she would watch it with her. Got to a point where my daughter would say, "Oh gosh, we're going to have to talk about this, aren't we?" Right? Yes, we are. Because what we want, you see the relationship that those two people have. Do you believe that that's what real life is like? Do you believe that two people see each other, fall in love, and have happily ever after, right? That's what you see on TV. But is that real life? So staying engaged, staying in relationship and communication and conversation when your children are older is really, really important. And the other school would be for those with younger children, right? The formation in the younger years is so, so critical. Just that sweetness, right? That sweetness of children at a young age, worshiping, right? And praying and praising and just, just hearing that, my 7-year-old granddaughter a couple of years ago, uh, praying in an environment with older children, like, it just brought tears to my eyes, thinking, because this is what's being modeled at home. And then kind of bringing tears to my eyes, thinking that model came from us, right? We modeled that for our daughter and her husband, who then now model that for their children. So it's so important to build that formation at a young age, to get that confidence, so that as they grow and their peers start to fall away and more temptations start to come their way, that they can always confidently stand their ground and say, no, I won't participate in that. No, I won't be part of that. No, I won't say that. No, I won't do that. Because positive peer pressure works just as well as negative peer pressure. I
Right.
can tell you how many experiences in my educational leadership environment where it only would have taken one student in the group to say no, and then the majority of the group would have walked away. But nobody wanted to say no. So I always taught my children to be the one who said, not wagging their finger at everybody else and saying, "You're wrong, you shouldn't be doing that," but to just simply say, "No, I'm not going to do that." Right? And then
Mm.
and then if we as parents continue to encourage that, then they become adults like that. And then we as adults can have relationships like that, where we can disagree and we can have conversations about topics that are very heated, but not get heated, and just listen to each other and respect each other's values and walk away at the end, just recognizing that you believe what you believe and I believe what I believe. And thank you for sharing. Now I understand your perspective a little bit better. And that's it. And that is what our world is lacking, because that is not what we have been training our children to do. And now those children are adults, right? So we have to reverse that tide. So parents in public education, parents in Christian education, same challenge. Stay engaged, but recognize that we are in this world. We're not of it, but we are in this world. So we have to be trained for how to manage in this world, to be still faithful to the gospel, faithful to the word, and not to be exclusive. I used the word before. I don't remember what the word is now, but we can't isolate, right?
Right.
We've got to be engaged in the world, but we've got to be prepared for how to manage ourselves in it.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. So lastly, we've gone on for too long. All good stuff. All good stuff. Um,
You can edit
so
out what you don't like.
no. That's no, I don't do that. I don't do that. Um, we yeah, we're at the end here of our conversation, but I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of share, in case someone hears this and they're interested in your ministry or how to kind of get in contact with you. Can you share with us how to get in contact with you, how to partner with what God is doing with you currently?
No, thank you. I'm honored and humbled that you would ask that. I have a website. that's pretty straightforward. If you see my name on the show notes, just add solutions to the end, and you get dansimonsolutions.com. That's my
Yep.
website. A lot about my the different lanes that I'm in now, whether it be career college advising, whether it be coming in to speak, whether it be life coaching. I'm just using the gifts that God's given me, the life experience that He's given me, and pouring into others at this point. And if you wanted to, on the website, there is a contact me location to just plug in, and there's a Calendly opportunity to jump on my calendar as well. And my email is also simple. It's just dan@dansimonsolutions.com. So email, go to my website. Let's start. For me, it's all about conversation. So if there is some way I can come alongside and support you as a parent, I would encourage you to reach out. Let's start with a conversation and see where God leads it.
Amen. Dan Simon Sr., thank you so much, sir, for joining me on the Counter Revolution podcast. This was definitely enlightening conversation. And yeah, let's continue the conversation.
I'd love that, John. Thank you so much for including me, and I'll look forward to any opportunity I have to speak with you in the future. Thank you.
Yes, sir. No problem.
Yes, sir. No problem.
Have a good day. Good night.
Good night. Good night. Thank you, John.
Okay, so thank you so much again for being here, for listening to this conversation. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dan Simon. Again, thank you, Dan, for being gracious enough to talk with me. Again, I do not agree with everything that my friend Dan Simon said, but I didn't come in this to agree with everything with anybody. I don't agree with anybody on everything, but as you can hear through the conversation, we agree a lot more than we disagree. And I thought it was a great conversation with Dan Simon. Thank you, and I pray that blessed you. Please consider sharing this with as many people as you can. Consider downloading the podcast. Rate my podcast. Please rate this podcast and let others know what you think. And if you're watching on YouTube, obviously subscribe, blah, blah, blah. You can follow Dan Simon at Dan Simon Solutions, as he already said, Dan Simon's solutions.com. I mean, there's some things there that you can benefit from. And you can definitely follow me on social media, on Twitter. Um, the links are gonna be in the descriptions below. Really, the only way to support me right now, or the best way to support me, is to download and rate and share the podcast. But you can also sign up to my email list. If you follow the link to my Substack, I can share whenever I release an episode. It'll go directly to your email, to your mailbox. But I also write a little bit. I'm not really a writer, but I've been challenged to write out my thoughts. So I take my thoughts from my head, put them in on paper, and share them to the world. Uh, that's kind of what I have. So if you like that kind of thing, you like to read better than listen to me, go and listen to go and read my Substack. Put in your email and subscribe to my Substack. There you will receive written materials, but you also receive whenever I release another episode. Be looking out for an episode from this following this episode. I am going to be having a conversation with another amazing woman of God who is a warrior for the kingdom of God and who has very much experience in the field of education. I think it's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Be on the lookout for that. Peace out.